there's an awful lot, and we'll do it in 2 bits. So we'll do the Stonehenge stuff first, and then we'll come back to all the Turkey stuff. So all the latest revelations. And we're starting off with Stonehenge simply because it's somewhere that is very much in the news at the moment. I mean, yeah, one of the biggest stories which I'll be talking about is the fact that the most important stone of the whole of the site, known as the Altar Stone, is now known to have come from northeastern Scotland, possibly the Orkney Islands. And this has just opened up a whole can of worms, basically, as to what was going on there and why it was there, and you know who brought it there and when. But this is something which I've been looking at even before the announcements were made late last year, because for some reason I started to focus very heavily on Stonehenge, realising that it had far more of a significance than I'd ever realised. So let's talk about that. Right, well firstly, obviously there have been lots of ideas as to what Stonehenge represents, including a place where the Druids worshipped the sun, a place to venerate the dead, a cattle corral, that was one theory, a healing sanctuary, that came out just before the 2012 Olympics because they wanted to put a nice spin on the place, or something else. Well, that something else has been gradually emerging across the past 15 to 20 years, and that is the possibility that it actually acted as a sonic temple. In other words, that it was specifically made to generate and resonate sound. Now, there's me with a guy called Professor Trevor Cox at the University of Salford, and basically what he did was to create an exact version of Stonehenge, which was 1/12 the size, and then make sounds in the middle and record the whole lot. And he came to the conclusion, obviously working with his team, that yes, not only was this acoustically enhanced, but on top of that, that the people outside of Stonehenge wouldn't have heard anything. So in other words, this was deliberately done so that rituals could take place, or ceremonies, whatever you want to see them, inside for a specific purpose. What was that purpose? Well, that's what we'll come on to. Another project looking at the same ideas, but basically through the famous blue stones at Stonehenge. There's 2 main types of stones there. There is what's known as the sarsen stones, which are the big tritholons. They come from a local form of very hard sandstone called sarsen. And then you have the smaller stones, which have come from West Wales, a distance probably of about 175 miles. And there's a couple of them there. And the guy on the left is Paul Devereux, a very famous Earth Mysteries writer, with a gentleman by the name of John Wollstonecraft. And what they are doing is examining the blue stones, not only at Stonehenge, but also at their source in Wales, to find out their acoustic properties. And they too came to the conclusion that Stonehenge acted as a sonic temple, and that the blue stones were specifically brought there because of their acoustic properties, and that prior to being, seconded for use at Stonehenge, they played a role in West Wales. And we now know that that's almost certainly true, that before coming to Stonehenge, they'd been in a stone circles at a place called Wainmorn in the Preseli Hills, and that they were deliberately brought here for use. So the question then becomes, and I mean there are various other projects that have been done, basically come to the same conclusion. We'll mention one of those as we go along. But the question then becomes is, why would you want to create somewhere to generate sound? Was it just because they like music, or they danced a lot, or whatever, or is there some more profound cosmic reason? And what I got onto was the clue is the shape that Stonehenge creates. And as we will see, that's what's known as a dodecahedron. Now this is a 3-dimensional dodecahedron. It's got 12 sides, 5 pentagonal faces, and 20 vertices or corners. And this is what it looks like flat plan, basically. This is a 2-dimensional dodecahedron. And what I discovered, and I mean, I could show you 20 different pictures, all showing the same thing, but I'll only just show you a few, is that the exact layout of all of the different features at Stonehenge conform almost precisely to a two-dimensional dodecahedron. I mean, here's one example here where you can quite clearly see that the geometry works perfectly with Stonehenge. We'll come back to some others in a minute. But the more complicated form of a dodecahedron is known as a small stellated dodecahedron, of which you can see one here. So it's basically a dodecahedron with a load of points on the end of it. And this is what its flat plan, two-dimensional form looks like. And when you apply that to Stonehenge, that also fits perfectly into the underlying geometry of the sites, basically. And I mean, you know, I've shown this to various people. I've done articles about this, and I think most people think, well, what does it mean? You know, I mean, it's easy drawing lines on a site and showing that there's geometry, but why would they actually do this? You know, why might Stonehenge be designed as a two-dimensional model of a dodecahedron? Well, the answer has probably been there for thousands of years. And for this, we have to go back to the age of Pythagoras, and one of his pupils, or certainly somebody who took up the reins of his work in the 5th into the 4th century BC. And that is Plato, the philosopher Plato. Because in a book that he wrote called the Timaeus, he talked about geometry and the primary forms that exist to create physical matter. And he felt that there were 5 of them. You've got the cube, you've got the triangle, you've got the one at the top left, I can't remember what it's called, it'll come tetrahedron, that's it. And then the isosceles on the bottom right, and then the one at the top will come on to, which is obviously the dodecahedron. And he saw the other 4 as representing the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. But the one that was important, the one that transcended all of this, was the dodecahedron, which is in the top right. And he started his sentence by saying, one construction still remained after the other 4, the 5th, that is the dodecahedron. And of this, he tells us, and God used this in order to embroider shapes upon the universe. In other words, what he was trying to say is that the universe is shaped like a dodecahedron. Now, obviously, this is something that he came to probably via the work that was already existing from the Pythagorean school, Pythagoras and obviously his pupils. But what I find interesting is that there's a story of a gentleman by the name of Hippasus of Metapontum, who was a Greek philosopher and an early follower of Pythagoras. And he was, according to the story, drowned on a fishing trip because he revealed the importance of the dodecahedron to the outside world. In other words, there were great secrets to do with the dodecahedron and its shape, which only the initiated, the elite, should know this knowledge. It was not for the general public because it was dangerous for them to know. And because Hippasus revealed this information, he was murdered for this. Okay. So, what is the secret? I mean, is it simply the fact that the universe could be shaped like a dodecahedron? Well, anyway, we come forward in time now to the beginning of the 20th century, when a French mathematician, theoretical physicist, engineer, philosopher of science by the name of Jules Henry Poincaré also came up with similar ideas about the shape of the universe. And he wrote about this extensively in papers, and this came to be known as the Poincaré dodecahedral space. which would mean that the universe is a closed sphere with 12 sides, in other words, dodecahedron. And I think it's important just to mention what science tells us about the universe at the moment. They believe in the idea that after the Big Bang, the universe expands outwards, and basically eventually perhaps it will stop expanding and will contract down and go into what they call the Big Crunch. But the standard model of the universe is that it's flat like a piece of paper, and infinite. In other words, it has no corners, it has no end, it has no shape. But Poincaré worked out, mathematically, that no, it must have shape, it must have curves, and if it has got curves, the only type of a regular polygon that would fit is a dodecahedron. And this was at the beginning of the 1900s, and then something quite incredible happened, because in the 2000s we started to map something called the cosmic microwave background. And what this is that at the beginning of the Big Bang there was let's say a huge explosion, but at the start, for the first 380,000 years, there was no atomic matter whatsoever. There was only a substance, something known as the full state of matter, called plasma, or actually gluon plasma is the actual term. And this was incredibly hot, obviously, but what happened was that after 380 years, it cooled down and the plasma transformed into the most basic atomic matter, which is hydrogen. And from hydrogen, eventually, all other atomic matter is created, okay? But even though this was such a long time ago, 13.7, 13.8 billion years ago, the fact of the matter is that with our telescopes, we can see into the past, because basically it takes light and obviously other types of energy so much time to cross the vistas of space to reach us. And that includes what happened in the early stages of the universe. So that the afterglow of the Big Bang is still out there now and can still be recorded by satellites, and it's known as the cosmic microwave background. And various satellites have been up there to record it and to map it out, and also they've been able to do it from various satellite arrays on the ground now. And that's what it basically looks like. The thing going right the way along the centre is what's known as the galactic plane, the edge of our own Milky Way galaxy. But here's where it starts getting interesting, because when the scientists started to look at this cosmic microwave background, they started to realise that it had patterns in it. And these were patterns of temperature. And those patterns of temperature suggested that there was form within it, which just shouldn't be there if the universe is flat. So a number of papers started to come out. This one here, for instance, in what year is this? 2003, showing that the most likely shape behind the universe was that of a dodecahedron. And of course, this is exactly what Plato and presumably Pythagoras and whatever were saying as early as 400 to 500 BC. And perhaps this was knowledge in some way that was already present, was already there. And even more has come out since that time. I mean, one of the greatest astrophysicists of our time, who's still alive today, friend of Stephen Hawking, is Roger Penrose, okay? And Roger Penrose has come out with some incredible theories relating to the cosmic microwave background, including the fact that there are patterns in it that he thinks relate to a previous universe that existed before the creation of our own. Now, we won't go into that, but one of the things that he showed to try and prove the case was the fact that there seems to be these weird concentric circles within the cosmic microwave background. Here's one on the left. And what I've realised almost immediately is that these have the proportions of a two-dimensional dodecahedron. So on the right, I overlaid it and it's absolutely perfect. So to me, this is evidence of the presence of dodecahedrons, not just one, but within it, other smaller ones, basically. And that, you know, that these whole ideas related to the dodecahedron are real. Okay, right, back to sound. So, I'm realising that the dodecahedron may be behind why the people at Stonehenge created the structures that they did, which, by the way, all didn't happen at the same time. It took several hundred years to essentially complete what we know as Stonehenge today, but I'm pretty certain that they kept to an existing blueprint and ground plan. So, bringing together sound and dodecahedrons, I'm thinking, is it possible that sound can create dodecahedrons? In other words, is there some kind of frequency behind it all that can create this shape? And is that the reason why the people at Stonehenge were doing it? So that the shape of Stonehenge was deliberately done with the use of sound to generate three-dimensional dodecahedrons within that space. Okay. Now the answer is what's known as cymatics. And cymatics is the idea that you can use some kind of fluidic medium, whether it be water, whether it be, you know, liquid mercury, whether it be iron filings, whether it be you know, flour or something like that, to create the patterns of sound. I mean, this is something that has been known about probably since about the 18th century, that frequencies of sound generate beautiful geometric patterns. I think the earliest term was the Chladni plates. I think this was in the 19th century, but this is something that we've been able to perfect. And here is a dodecahedron that has been created using cymatics, and obviously there you can see the geometry associated with it. So with this, I'm thinking to myself, clearly there must be a frequency behind the creation of dodecahedrons, and can we find that at Stonehenge? Well, one of the other projects at Stonehenge to try and understand its acoustic properties was undertaken in the mid-2000s by this gentleman here and his team, and that's Dr. Rupert Till, who's Professor of Music in the Department of Music and Drama at the University of Huddersfield. And he concluded that the sound generated within the monument's interior would have caused reverberations and echoes at a very low frequency. Measurements taken at the site by Till suggested a fundamental resonant frequency in the range of 10 hertz. Now 10 hertz is very, very low. In fact, so low that unless the amplitude of it is so strong, you won't even be aware of it. I mean, it probably has higher harmonics, which you can hear, but the actual frequency itself, in theory, you can't hear. But, as I said, if you crank it up to 11, you would feel it inside you a lot, because it's what's known as infrasound. And infrasound affects the body and mind. It can make people feel very uncomfortable. It can induce paranoia and fear, but it can also induce otherworldly experiences and the seeing of what we would call ghosts. In fact, it's been used by paranormal researchers for a long time to explain haunted houses that ghosts have seen. If they can find something that's generating infrasound, then they use that as a debunking device to say, oh, it's obviously all because of that. Well, I think that that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, personally, because it would seem that the ancients were very much aware of infrasound in various different ancient and indigenous cultures and created instruments to produce it. So, 10 hertz, okay, that's very, very low, but that was the resonance frequency that he established, okay? Now, in my own work, and I won't even bother to tell you how I got to this, but it was in a paper that I did in, I think, 2018. What I worked out is that there was a particular measurement that kept cropping up at Stonehenge and in connection with the nearby monuments of Durrington Walls and Woodhenge, and in the relationship between all of these sites, which was 144 feet. It seemed that the builders were trying to emphasise this particular measurement. And even back then, I realised that the possibility that this was important to sound, because a frequency, a sound frequency, is dependent on how a wave will occur and go back to the same spot it begins, and that creates a distance. And 144 feet creates a frequency of 7.815 hertz, which I thought was very close to 10 hertz. Bear in mind that Professor Till's work was an estimation, and I wondered whether we were getting down to the right frequency here, that maybe, just maybe, this related to the absolute frequency of the acoustics at Stonehenge to produce a three-dimensional dodecahedron. So I put the word out to people that I felt would know something about this, to see if I could gain more information, and initially I couldn't, but then I was put onto something known as the Merian matrix. Now, basically what this is a multidisciplinary team who came together to imagine an evolving three-dimensional geoform under the name of the Merian matrix, and they based it on the work of earlier geometricians, including Plato, Johannes Kepler, Buckminster Fuller. These are all names that people know, developed very complex geometries. Now, they went beyond this to create what they called the Merian matrix, okay? And the interesting thing is that they worked out through its geometry and the mathematics that it had a frequency of creation which was 7.97 hertz. Now, when I heard this, I thought that's pretty close to the estimation that I got to, which was 7.815. So I started to get excited, basically. But, you know, what more could I find out about this? Well, enter this gentleman here, John Stuart Reid. Now, he's the CEO of a company called Simoscope. And what this has done is created an instrument that you can use cymatics to produce the patterns of sound. You know, it's got dials, the rest of it, you can dial in exactly the right frequency, and obviously with the right fluidic medium, you can reproduce it, okay? And so it's, you know, this is not just a chance thing, this will happen every time. So the people from the Merian Matrix approached him and said, could you generate a frequency of 7.97 and see what happens? And before I show you some of the results, let's tell you what happens when you do this. Because not only did he get results, but what he also found is that if you go either way of 7.97 hertz, by even just 1/100th of a hertz, no pattern is created. It has to be exactly on that pattern, on that frequency. So it's unique. I mean, clearly, obviously, they already had that frequency and they wanted to test it out. And there may be possibly higher harmonics of it, which we may be able to get onto, but that was the frequency. So they went up to Manchester, a group of people involved in the Merian Matrix, and they got John Stuart Reid to generate this, and these were the patterns, and it created a three-dimensional dodecahedron, okay? But not just three-dimensional, but also possibly four-dimensional in nature. And there is a four-dimensional version of the dodecahedron, I mean, clearly we are three-dimensional creatures. We can't fully perceive what's going on in the fourth dimension, but we can try and draw it in some way. And on the left is a four-dimensional dodecahedron, and on the right essentially is the Marian matrix. So, you know, quite clearly this frequency is associated with the generation of a dodecahedron, not just on a three-dimensional nature, but possibly on a four-dimensional nature as well. Okay? So, is it possible, therefore, that Stonehenge was created not only as a sonic temple to produce this particular frequency, but it was deliberately shaped into a dodecahedron to create and to contain that particular shape? And why would you do that? And quite clearly the answer is to resonate with the actual universe itself, which, let's point out, it's now commonly accepted in science that at the Big Bang it generated a sound. There was a sound that accompanied the Big Bang. If you check on YouTube, you can find it, you can listen to it itself. I mean, clearly what they've done is taken raw frequencies and convert them into sound, but it's there, you can listen to it. So we know that sound was a component in the creation of the universe in the beginning. So I think that the people at Stonehenge somehow got onto this. Now, I can only assume that it was intuition, and it was knowledge that was passed down or reinvented at the time of Pythagoras, rediscovered. I suspect it probably was already around and had been passed down through some kind of secret tradition. But anyway, so that's what I think is going on at Stonehenge. What's so interesting is that we obviously see Stonehenge in the state it is today. We can put the pieces back together and imagine what it looked like. But there are theories that suggest that it did have like a conical or a spherical roof. And here, these are some of the ideas here, although there is one which I couldn't bring you because I haven't got permission to show it, where it actually has a design that's a 10-sided dodecahedral shape. And I'm trying to get hold of the person that created this particular roof, because I get the feeling that they're really onto something. But there is an ancient account from a classical text by Diodorus Siculus that actually talks about an island in the west, or the northwest, that has both a magnificent sacred precinct of Apollo and a notable temple which is adorned with votive offerings and is spherical in shape. Now, and this was originally written by a guy called Hecatius of Abdara about 300 BC on the island of the Hyperboreans in the extreme northwest of Europe. It almost has to be this country. It has to be the British Isles. And if it is the British Isles, the most obvious spherical temple is Stonehenge. And you'll see this mentioned in dozens of books about Stonehenge. And if it is, then I think there is a possibility that Stonehenge did have some kind of roof that enhanced this three-dimensional aspect of it being a dodecahedron. Okay, right, now, provided this all works, I have something special for you, so you can just take in what I've just said before we move on to the next part, okay? And this is what happened when John Stuart Reid produced the Marian Matrix. It's a little video which I'm going to play to you now. I didn't know we can get this going.
In December 2012, we reconvened in Northern England, and the lab was set up to resonate a few drops of water to disprove that this inaudible priming frequency, less than 8 Hertz in the theta range, actually generated a very complex pattern. The frequency was injected into the cell using a voice well generator, and as the amplitude, or the volume, was slowly increased, a pattern of rings appeared, and to almost everyone's amazement, the predicted blue sphere appeared, opened, and evolved into a geometric and knotted pattern that is a precise match to the Marian Matrix.
That is what I think was going on at Stonehenge. They were trying to connect with the very source of the universe itself. Okay, I told you earlier about the so-called altar stone, so let's look a little bit at this and then we'll have a break after this. Now, there are basically three types of stone at Stonehenge. There is the sarsens, which is a very hard metamorphic, which means it's been put under intense pressure. It's a hardnet sandstone. There is the blue stones that come from West Wales. Mostly they're made of two types of stone called spotted dolerite and rhyolite, which are volcanic in nature. But there was also the altar stone. Now the altar stone is flat. I'll show you there. That's where it is now. It's beneath two stones that have fallen down from one of the so-called tritholons. So it's mostly covered, but that's roughly where it is. It's stone 80. And it's made of a different type of sandstone, what they call a micaceous sandstone, which means it's got a lot of mica in it, which when you look at it, particularly when it's wet, it almost looks like a starry doorway, basically, literally. And it's 16 feet long, it weighs just over 6 tons, and it's flat, okay? But all the indications are that it once stood in the site, okay? And what we now know, it was long thought that it had come from West Wales, the same general area as the blue stones. And this was just an assumption for 100 years. But we now know from an analysis of the mineralogy and the chemical composition of tiny fragments that have been, taken from it or fallen off at whatever time, that it's made of a type of what they call an old red sandstone that comes from what's known as the Orcadian Basin in northeastern Scotland, that stretches from the area of Inverness all the way to the Orkney Islands and beyond. And the people that created Stonehenge were known as the Grooveware people, and they came from the Orkney Islands, particularly the Orkney mainland, and they journeyed south and eventually came into southern Britain and created Stonehenge and Avebury and various other sites. So did they bring this stone with them? And if they did, what did it represent? Well, firstly, it needs to be pointed out that there was not one, there were two altar stones originally. That seems to be what the evidence suggests, and that comes from the fact that in the 17th century, when the very first excavations were done at the site in 1620 to 1625 by the Duke of Buckingham, on behalf of the king, who was James I, they found another altar stone which was removed. Now, it's ambiguous as to where it went, but it seems like the smart money is that it was actually moved, possibly in 2 pieces, to a local village called Berwick St James, where it was eventually used as a bridge, or 2 bridges, and then in the 19th century they were stood upright like standing stones, of which obviously there are many in the area, and that they remain to this day. There is a problem though, and that problem is the fact that they're made of limestone. And limestone, according to some commentators on Stonehenge, was never used at Stonehenge, therefore these stones couldn't possibly have come from Stonehenge. But a number of well-known megalithic experts have said no, we are pretty certain that these did come from Stonehenge. And what's interesting, I think, is that limestone is something that would be gleaming white when first quarried, and it would have contrast to the very dark sandstone, which was like a sort of grey-green colour of the other one. And these are the 2 pieces of it. They originally would have been about 15 feet tall and would have looked something like that when together. Okay, that was the original stone of those. I mean, because you've got to remember that a lot of it is actually buried beneath the ground. So it would probably have been about 15 feet tall. It had like this gully going down the centre, which some suggest was when it was used as a bridge, but I'm not so sure about that. It may have been an original feature. But that was it, and I think that this is the way that they would have looked. One darker and one lighter. Almost certainly these acted as what we call portal stones, like 2 big stones acting as the entrance into what might be perceived as a liminal realm, a realm that's outside of normal reality. Now, whether this involved getting into an altered state or whatever, we don't know, but we could speculate on that. But that's roughly how we think that they looked. And I worked with a guy called Simon Banton to try and understand where these stones could have been placed. This all happened last year. And he found 2 stone holes that were unclaimed. In other words, we don't know what was in them. And they were perfectly on the alignment of the site itself, which is the summer solstice sunrise to the winter solstice sunset, and that they were turned perfectly away towards the winter solstice sunrise. So in other words, the 2 were actually on that line, but they were turned, like you can see here, towards the winter solstice sunrise and the summer solstice sunset. So this makes perfect sense of their positioning, basically. And this is how we think that they would have looked like originally. We think that they were there during phase 1 of Stonehenge. So that goes back to 3000 BC, when the Grooveware people first created this site. And you can see, these are the 2 stones here. You had the big henge going around there. You had these 56 holes, which are known as the Albury holes. And you had these 4 other stones, which came at the end of this period, when they're known as the station stones, and they create what's known as the station stone rectangle, which is also aligned to both the sun and the moon. And this is how they were. We think that they were taken down in the early Bronze Age, possibly around 2000 BC, and laid flat, but they remained in the same orientation as their alignment. So in other words, even to this day, the altar stone that's still present still points towards the mid-winter sunrise, and in the opposite direction, sunset at the time of the summer solstice. Okay? Now, let's introduce something else here. This is what's known as the Bush Barrow Lozenge. It is a gold plaque that's just over 7 inches in length and just over 6 inches in width, and it was found on the chest of a tall and stout man inside a Bronze Age bowl barrow about a kilometre away from Stonehenge, at a place called Normanton Down, in 1808. And it has attracted so much attention because of the quite incredible geometry on it, which seems to have incredible meaning. And also, the angles of it are very specific to Stonehenge, suggesting that this chieftain which is what they assume it is, probably had his seat at Stonehenge itself, and that this was some kind of symbol of office, basically. Now look at these angles, 81, 81, 99 and 99. Now, if you look at the angles at Stonehenge to do with the two solstices, that's the exact angles at Stonehenge. See? The 99, obviously 81 was across there. And what's interesting about this is that these angles only work for Stonehenge. You know, if you went a few miles down the road, it would start to shift. The latitude would cause those angles to change. So, in other words, the bush barrow lozenge is very specific to Stonehenge itself. You know, and that suggests that it was created for the purpose of being worn by somebody whose seat actually it was that. Now, what's interesting is that at the same latitude in Germany, at a place called Mittelberg Hill, which is close to a place called Nebra, in 1999, metal detectorists discovered illegally this incredible disc, which they call the Nebra sky disc. And as you can see, it's got a whole load of stars on it. It's 32 stars. There's quite clearly what's probably the sun and the moon. And these here are thought to mark the solstices, from solstice to solstice. And this is exactly the same degrees and angles as the bush barrow lozenge. And I find that fascinating because the Mittelberg Hill is exactly the same latitude as Stonehenge. So in other words, this was clearly made for that particular location as well. Okay, just throwing that in. Now, if you create the bush barrow lozenge as a diagram and put in the directions, the exact directions of the solstices, this exactly is where the altar stones would have been placed. Exactly. So in other words, there was a very specific placement of them. Right, there's the two sites of them, the two stone holes, and it fits absolutely perfectly. And there's a lot more numerics involved in this, which I'm not going to go into in any detail because it's just beyond the scope. But at some point we'll do a much fuller lecture on this. I'm still working on it at the moment. But here's just a couple of important things about it. In the middle of the bush barrow lozenge, you've got 9 small diamonds in the innermost nesting diamond. Right? Now, I think that this relates to a numerology that gradually increases, expands as it goes outwards, meaning that the next diamond is 18 in value, the next one is 27, and then the last one is 36. Now, the important thing about that is that there are 36 triangles making up the outermost of the diamond. So this fits absolutely perfectly, but there's a reason for telling you this tonight, which I'll come on to. And that's the fact that the exact size of the bush barrow lozenge, which is 7.25 imperial inches, in size is exactly 1/36 of a unit of measure that's found in association with Stonehenge, which is 8 megalithic yards. This was a type of measure that was realised to be used in the creation of megalithic monuments by an engineer called Professor Alexander Thom in the 1960s, and it seems to be present at Stonehenge. And that the bush barrow lozenge is also 1/100th of 24 megalithic yards, which is the exact gap between the two altar stones. And it's 1/432 of 96 megalithic yards, which relates to the distance from the centre of Stonehenge to the gap between these two huge stones known as the hill stones, of which the northern one is today missing. But that was like a targeting the summer solstice sunrise during the epoch of its construction. And I'm not going to go more into this, but I mean that's quite remarkable, I think. Now, as far as the altar stone is concerned, once I got onto it, I thought I need to see this. You know, I need to examine it. I need to, you know, connect with it in some way. So myself and some friends went down to Stonehenge for the winter solstice last year. As you can see here, all this fun going on, and here's a lady who specifically come up to the altar stone to play a Tibetan bow, and at the bottom there's our good friend Debbie Cartwright trying to attune to it, and she got some interesting stuff which I can tell you about at some other point. But there were so many people there that, you know, you were virtually sort of just, you know, completely enclosed in this area, but Debbie's had crawled over stones to get to this because we desperately wanted to make contact with the altar stone. But what was so weird is that whilst we were actually there, it's almost like I became guardian of that stone. People kept coming up and saying, oh, you know, what's this? I said, oh, that's the altar stone. I'll tell them a bit about it. And one of the people that came up was this guy and a girl that had come over from Australia, and I said, it's your son? He said, yes, I know. He said, I wrote the paper saying that it came from northeastern Scotland, from the Orkney Islands. Mm-hmm. His name was Anthony Clark. He still is, obviously. And so, and he knew me because he just read my article all about the altar stone and thanked me for, you know, credited him actually in it. And it was quite an incredible meeting. And a lot of people have said, and then paper actually came out saying that we don't think that the stone did come from the Orkney because its exact chemical signature doesn't match exactly the other stones on Orkney or even those in the quarry. But as Anthony said to me, he said, don't worry about that. He said, a rock can change its chemical composition. And he sort of held his hand up like this. It can change dramatically. He said, you know, you can't say, oh, you know, you looked at a few other stones, some of the other stone circles like the Ring of Brodgar or the Stone and it doesn't exactly match what we have within the Rockwell stones, and then dismiss it. So, and also at the moment, I don't know if you know, but there is a TV series on Stonehenge on Channel 4 that also has been motivated by this altar stone discovery. Now, I've not seen it yet. I need to binge it at some point. I've been away for the first few episodes, but it's saying some very, very interesting things, including the fact that the altar stone did come from the Orkney Islands. Quite specific. It says it came from the Orkney mainland, basically. So anyway, as I said, we're talking about stones that would have been used as portals into a liminal world. So this is what we think was going on at Stonehenge in the past. And where else do we find portal stones exactly the same? Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, these incredible enclosures that are 11,000 years old. But we'll talk all about them when we come back from the break, as we'll go into part two. Right. To restart. Right,
Part two.
Part two, everybody. So, this is a reconstruction, full size, of enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe that's inside the Şanlıurfa Archaeological Museum, which for me is the most incredible museum in the world. I mean, it's got thousands of items from this culture, which the archaeologists want to refer to today as Taş Tepeler. Taş means stone, basically, or stony, and Tepeler means many tepes. Tepes are like these artificial mounds that are often about, you know, 200 or 300 yards or more in size, and maybe 200 in width, maybe 100 feet tall, that the ancients built all of their structures within, and they would keep building on top, they would keep covering them over until we had them. And they call them tepes in Egypt, they call them tells in, you know, Syria and Iraq and whatever. They're also known as hoyaks as well. But anyway, so that's the name that they got. Now that's the size of them. They're 18 feet tall. these pillars. They probably weigh 10, 15 tonnes. And as I said, this is a reconstruction, but we'll see the real thing in a minute. And this is the area that we're dealing with now. It used to be called Urfa. It's called Llanlurfa today, which means the great or the grand Urfa. This was the Edessa in the Bible, the city of Edessa in the Bible, and its most ancient name was Adama, which means the place of Adam, because it was always believed, and is to this day, that it's believed that this is the site of the Garden of Eden, basically. Well, that's something we're not going to really get onto today. So we're talking about a whole series of stone enclosures, megalithic structures, the earliest so-called monumental architecture in history at Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Here's one of the enclosures here, which is enclosure C. You can see it's very high and elevated. This is what it looks like from another angle. The reconstructed one that I showed you in the museum, that's based on this enclosure here, which is enclosure D. There's enclosure C, enclosure B, enclosure A. And I mean, if you're into all this sort of stuff, at some point you've got to go and see this stuff. It will blow your mind, because in age, you're talking from 9,600 BC down to about 8,000 BC. So technically, this is at least 5,000 years older than Stonehenge. But that's Stonehenge that we see today. But there were special sites in the area of Stonehenge, including possibly a mound structure that was actually in the position of Stonehenge, and there were these huge, great, almost like totem poles just outside of the circle that probably were decorated, you know, very much like the totem poles, not only of places like Alaska and obviously other parts of North America, but also in places like Siberia, which they still make them to this day. You've got animals in 3D relief on the sides of the stones, like this one here, which is pillar 23 in enclosure C. That's a leopard, by the way. That's the stylised way that they would do leopards. To show the sophistication, you know, going back, as I say, at least 9,600 BC. And you've got all sorts of animals carved on the stones here. There's a list of some of the animals: boars, snakes, cranes, foxes, aurochs, gazelles, lizards, scorpions, arachnids, wild ass, leopards, vultures, canines, wader birds, flightless birds. And I mean, you know, some of the stones are even moulded around the actual carving itself. This is one of the stones in what's known as the Lion Pillars building there, that probably dates about 8,500 BC. It's real strong likeness. And this is not a lion, by the way, it's a panther. They initially thought that they were lions, and the name unfortunately has stuck, but that is almost certainly a panther. Panthers and leopards were incredibly important for these people for some reason. This is a fox. This is actually on the reconstruction of the stone that's in the museum at Llanlurfa. But what's all that coming out of its feet? What's all that coming out of its underside? Is that energy? Blood? Don't know. I mean, yeah, this is the sort of weirdness that you get with all of these. Plus, a number of these stones, well, not a number, I think all of them are anthropomorphic. In other words, they are seen to be conscious beings, particularly the ones in the centre, the so-called portal stones, huge monoliths in the centre. And they will have things like you know, belts on with symbols. This one's a three-pronged thing with a U beneath it. These H's, we'll come back to what they are. And this is a fox loincloth. And obviously arms and all the rest of it. And these are the hems of garments that this figure is wearing. And of course the head itself is the T-shaped termination of these stones, because almost all of them are T-shaped. And that T-shape is the extended jaw out the front and the elongated head out the back, which probably also includes probably wrapped around hair, possibly as dreads, and obviously maybe a sort of headdress around that on the outside. Yeah, that's basically what you see. And almost certainly there is some kind of glyphic language that these people were using. I mean, here you see it. I mean, all these symbols here. You've got like the C, the H, all the rest of it. There's something going on. This is not simply random. In fact, one of the great Sumerologists of the world, Irving Finkel, who works at the British Museum, you've probably seen videos of him or heard him talk. Great man. I mean, he came up to me at one point and he referred to some small item that was found at Göbekli Tepe, which has got like symbols on it. He said, that is a written language. You know, as if to emphasise to me, you need to be looking into this. These people had a written language, which means, that they were part of a civilization. If you look up what the word civilization is, it fits what we've got, not just with Göbekli Tepe, but there's at least a dozen of these so-called Tash Tepe sites now, including Karahan Tepe, which we'll look at in a minute. That's what Göbekli Tepe looks. It's got this roof on it now, and there's another roof around the back covering another area. They're going to be opening whole new areas this year, apparently excavating, so that should be quite exciting. Going backwards now. This is what it looks like on the inside. You can walk around on these walkways, so you can go around and get a good impression of the entire site, basically, or that part of the site that they've excavated. But now let's go on to the place which is even more exciting, I think, than Göbekli Tepe itself, and that's Karahan Tepe. And this is about 25 miles away from Göbekli Tepe towards the east-southeast, basically. It's in a remote region called the Tek Tek Mountains. And what you have here is a series of structures that are partly cut into the bedrock, meaning that they represent the oldest rock architecture anywhere in the world, certainly the oldest that's accepted, you know, within our archaeology. This is a huge elliptical enclosure here, which is called Structure AD, and next to it, and quite clearly adjacent and aligned to it, is what we call the Pillars Shrine. This is Structure AB, where you have these 10 pillars that have been cut out of the bedrock as the rock has been removed, going downwards from the level surface that they've obviously levelled for this reason. And you've got 10 of these pillars in it, which are slightly phallic in appearance, but you've also got an 11th stone here, which is shaped like an arc or a curve, and almost certainly represents some kind of snake. Okay, but more importantly, you've got on this wall, on the wall, this huge human head that's on the end of a long serpentine neck, looking like something out of Beetlejuice, basically. If you've seen that film, you know what I'm talking about. And it's about this is about 3 times the size of a normal human head, and it's clearly what I call a snake genius. In other words, you know, a human-headed snake, a spirit that you know is there. And when you sit opposite it, you gain the impression it's trying to talk to you, because the mouth is open, and you know, and all you would need is just to be in a very slight altered state, and it's going to be talking to you. There's no question about that at all. And I think that, you know, this is part of what's going on here, that it's about communication. Just as it was with Stonehenge, communicating with the divine source there, the source of creation. I think the same thing is going on at these sites, but we'll investigate these more. Now, this is what it looks like from above, and the area that I've earmarked to the left-hand corner is the area that I've now uncovered what could be the largest of all of the structures so far. It's right on the top of the hill, and this is how it started to open up. And there, you've got these 2 portal stones. You've got a porthole, what I call a porthole stone, which is the central circular stone. And to the right of it, you had this incredible statue that was discovered, which I think I've got a picture of here. And this is 7.5 feet tall, even though it's sitting down on a bench, and there's a bench all the way around it. And therefore, if it stood up, it would be probably at least 9 feet tall. Now, is this deliberate? Is it supposed to be a giant, or is it just the way that they wanted to portray their ancestors? We don't know. But obviously you can see he's got all his anatomical features there. Obviously his hands coming round, which people say, oh, it's obviously something to do with some kind of fertility or sexual prowess or something like that. I don't think it is at all. That's not what it's about, not primarily at least. It's about basically saying, I have the power. And you find this same stance of people, you know, these statues with their hands coming round, either to their stomachs or their genitalia area, in cultures all the way around the world. And this is because ancient peoples believed that the seat of their power, their supernatural power, if you like, the way that they were able to affect the environment, people, the world around them, started down here and moved up through the body, very much like in Hindu Vedic tradition, the whole concept of the Kundalini, snake spirit, rising up the body, going up into the head. It starts from down here and rises up. That's what I think is being shown here. Now, as far as the alignments are concerned, we're onto this immediately. I mean, this was discovered in 2023. I was there within just a month of it being exposed. And, I mean, it was so strongly guarded when we were there that there was a guy there with a rifle saying, no photos, basically. They were so worried about, having found this statue, which we didn't even know existed until later that day, because it was actually covered up with like wood around it. But we got onto the orientation of it immediately, and what I found was that it was towards the north-northeast, directly in line with the rising of a star called Deneb in the constellation of Cygnus. Now, Cygnus is a celestial bird. In Europe, it's generally seen as a swan, occasionally a goose. In North America, it can be an eagle, a hawk, a turkey vulture. But in the Near East, Anatolia, and in neighbouring Armenia, even there to this day, it was a vulture. And it was a celestial vulture, but it also was very specifically placed on the Milky Way, where the Milky Way splits in two due to a dark area, which you can see here, which is known as the Dark Rift or the Great Rift or the Cygnus Rift. And that goes from the area of the star Deneb right the way up to the stars of Sagittarius and Scorpius. Okay, we'll come on to those in a second. So this is very specific alignment, and similar alignments that we'd actually found already at Göbekli Tepe. So for it to be aligned to Cygnus was not new. And there are sites all over the world. In Native American tradition, for instance, many mound complexes have an orientation towards Cygnus, particularly in association with the mid-winter sun. And that's also something that features at Karahan. So it's a picture of what it looks like there. As I said, this vulture was the sky figure. Why was the vulture associated with Cygnus? And the answer is because it represented what's known as a psychopomp. A psychopomp is a Greek word meaning soul carrier or soul accompanier. Okay? In other words, it accompanies the soul, the human soul, from this world into the next and back again. Now, that could be the soul of a dead person, or it could be the soul of the shaman, moving from this world into the next, okay? And the reason why the vulture became important is because of the process of sky burial. Sky burial is where bodies would be put out on a high place, and these big birds would come down, they would pick the flesh from the body, they would remove it, and obviously some of the smaller bones as well, and they would then fly off. And at some point, it was considered that once the body had been consumed of an individual, that their spirit inside the vulture, because obviously the meat's now being digested inside them, is being carried away by the vultures, but to where? Clearly they believe that the soul moved into another world, and that's exactly the reason why the vulture became that symbol. And this is a very beautiful and very cute, I think, vulture that was discovered at Karahan Tepe inside that enclosure that I just showed you, that brand new one, right? And that's where it is. So that's where the big guy is. There's the porthole stones. There was two other big stones here as well. You see these plates is quite clearly an altar that faces in that direction towards that farm actually. And that's the direction of Deneb rising. Okay, so it's clearly aligned to the Milky Way at that point. And that's what it looked like when it was in place. Now, we kept saying that we've got to make some plushies out of these. They look so cute, basically, that they look like something out of a Disney movie or whatever. But then we started looking online to see how much it costs to make just a few plushies and gave up that idea. So, if anybody makes plushies, talk to me. So anyway, still on the subject of the vulture is the most famous pillar at Göbekli Tepe, going back to there for a moment, and that's pillar 43, also known as the vulture stone. And there it is in situ. There it is close. You can see this huge great vulture here, and we'll come on to these in a minute. You can see a scorpion down there, another vulture with a headless figure there, various other things which we'll come on to. And the reason I want to show this is because what this starts to do is tell us what these people truly believed. I mean, not only if you overlay the stars of 9600 BC, does the vulture fit the position of Cygnus, and the scorpion represent the exact position of Scorpius, which we know is a constellation that was known as early as 4000 BC in Samaria. But this particular circle here corresponds to what's known as the northern celestial pole, the turning point of the heavens itself, which in shamanic tradition within Mongolia and Siberia was known as the hole in the sky. And it was through this that the soul accessed the other world. And I think that's exactly what it shows here. Probably also represents the soul as well. And it's also the head of this guy down here, because these ancient peoples believed that the seat of the soul was in the head, and they would keep the skulls separate and clean them up to use for oracular communication with the ancestors. They would often put, plaster on them, give them eyes, etc. And they would reserve these and put them in special places. And it's believed that the reason for that is communication with the ancestors. Quite clearly the person that owned the skull to start with, obviously. But these, some of my colleagues referred to as man bags. You've probably seen this on. But here's my first problem with this, the being handbags in general, is that the handle is offset to the left. Now, how many handbags have you owned where the handle is offset to the left? Surely if you put stuff in it, it's all going to go all over the place. So they're not handbags at all, in my opinion. What these three rectangles represent, with each of which have a separate animal connected with them. The one on the left has got like a wader bird, the one in the middle is a panther, the one on the right is a toad or a frog, is that they represent the three worlds that were believed to exist by many shamanic traditions around the world, from North America to Siberia to India within Hindu, and many places in between. They believed that there were three worlds. There was our world, which was like the Middle Earth. There was the sky world, which was like the same thing but up there somewhere. And there was the lower world, or some people obviously would call it, the underworld, or even hell, if you want to call it that. But each were quite distinctive. Worlds is probably not the right word. Realms is a better word. Three different realms, basically. And I think that what's being shown here, these are not handles, they are the roofs, if you like, of these particular wells. And here on the right is an old illustration showing how these wells came about. You can see that this is the interior of our well, where the stars are. You can obviously see the underworld here, there's the earth, you can see the ocean that goes round it, and there's another ocean which we'll come on to in a moment. And each of the different realms were seen to have their own skies, basically. I mean, it's a little bit like the concept of the hollow earth. People believe in the hollow earth. Well, obviously they believe that that has its own sky. Some people believe it even has its own sun. And this is part of a very ancient belief that goes back many, many thousands of years. So this arch here is what you see with all of these, in my opinion. So what's around the outside of it? Well, it's something that the ancients referred to as the cosmic ocean. I mean, here it's referred to as the primeval ocean. And it was this that was believed to exist before everything else. So before the physical universe came into being, they believed that there was a cosmic ocean, a primordial void, which was seen as watery, if you like, in nature. And it was out of this that the first land emerged. And that from that, everything else, came into being. But it also created the three wells. And when you look at Pillar 43, you'll see that above the man bags and below them are all of these V's, these chevrons. We're pretty certain that they represent water, the flow of the water of the cosmic ocean that's all around the three worlds. And you've also got, from the head of the vulture, going right the way across, these squares. They go to the neck of the wader bird, which is a symbol of the upper world, the sky world. And I think that this represents some kind of bridge. And this bridge between worlds is something that you find in many different ancient traditions. For instance, in Norse mythology, it's known as the Bifrost Bridge, or the Rainbow Bridge. In Zoroastrian, in Iranian tradition, it's known as the Shinvat Bridge. There's another version of it in Islamic tradition, for instance, and it even finds its way into medieval Grail romances, basically as the sword bridge, basically. And I think that that's basically what it's showing. So basically it's showing, this journey. This is obviously the psychopomp. It's taking the soul towards the sky world, and the whole thing to me is what you might call a mnemonic device. It's a teaching aid. So that the shamanic initiates, those wishing to know what happens once you go into an altered state of consciousness will be aware of just where they're going and what they encounter. Okay. There you go. There's the water here, and this is, I think, it's a bridge. These are the three different animals here. So, I mean, clearly there's a lot more on here. But one of the things which people often mention is, what's this H symbol that seems to be on its side or 90 degrees? Right here it is like facing upwards, and I think that this is simply, and I have to credit my good friend Debbie Cartwright for coming up with this, because myself, Richard sitting over there, and a few of our friends, we all went out to examine these sites to get a fresh insight last year. And one of the things that Debbie suggested, and I think that she's correct, is that this particular symbol ultimately simply means as above, so below. That you've got the T-pillar going upwards out of the ground, but that some of these enclosures would have water in them, and so that you would see the reflection of the stone going down below as well. So a case of as above, so below. And it's the same with the two side by side as well, that they represent two states of existence linked by this bar connecting them, basically. In other words, they're constantly thinking in terms of, the relationship between this world and the next. So back to Karahan Tepe, obviously that's the large head. That's obviously the structure, the pillar shrine. But one of the interesting things about it is the way that it looks from above, because you've got, this is the shape of it, it's not regular at all, and then you have this really deep groove coming out of it to the back, and this raised area here. Well, we were on tour in Egypt, and we threw this subject to the audience, the people on the tour group, and said, if you see anything that we've missed, please say. One lady put her hand up and said, do you think the possibility that this could represent the head of a human sperm, with this being its back? And I thought about it for the moment, then I thought, it can't be, because they didn't have microscopes back then, so unless they picked it up intuitively, that's probably not right. But I thought, wait a minute, what if actually it's not a sperm, but it's actually a snake? So I overlaid the head of a poisonous snake from the Tek Mountains called the Anatolian meadow viper, and it fitted perfectly, and I think that that's exactly what it is. That whole enclosure is a snake, and that this raised area going behind it, highlighted by the actual grooves, is actually its body. And there is its body coming away from it. And the way that you got into this enclosure, by the way, was from a tiny little porthole there. So basically what you're doing is you're going inside the head of a snake when you enter inside this shrine. Now, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to put yourself in the mouth of a venomous snake? And by the way, at the time when I did this, I didn't know that snake bones, lots of them have actually been found at Corahan of this particular species. So we know that they were using them almost certainly in their rituals and ceremonies, that particular species. But why go inside the head of a snake? By the way, that's the curved stone. You can see its mouth, all the rest of it. I think that represents, it's almost like a tongue within it. It's even possible that the pillars themselves do represent the fangs, symbolically at least, of that beast, basically. And the answer, I think, is the fact that there are alignments at Corahan towards both the summer and the winter solstice. Probably the most spectacular was one that was discovered by my good friends Hugh Newman and his partner J.J. Ainsworth, where they were there at the midwinter in 2021, and the sunlight that, as it just risen, came in and hit the big head and moved all the way around it, and only on the head. And what we worked out is that in 9000 BC, when we think that this structure was created, the sun would have been in a slightly different position and it would have hit the head more full on. And if this had a roof, which we think it did, this would have been an incredibly spectacular phenomenon. This would have took place just after dawn, for about 30 to 40 minutes just after dawn. But, but what's interesting is that overnight, on that night, which obviously is the night with the longest time of darkness, because it's midwinter's day, is if we go back to that enclosure that I showed you earlier, that's orientated towards the rising of Deneb, as you go round to the east, which is here, the Milky Way would have been perfectly visible, right the way low on the horizon, with the dark rift going from there where it starts, all the way up to that point to the east, to galactic centre, which is the exact orientation of the big main elliptical enclosure. So what's all this about the galactic centre? Well, the galactic centre is the centre of our own Milky Way galaxy. I mean, as you look and you see the Milky Way, which unfortunately we can't really see much of it this day and age because of light pollution. If you go out into a desert and you can see it, you see it going from horizon to horizon. It's a very spectacular view, and it looks like an arch, basically. But the brightest part of it is in the area of the stars of Scorpius and Sagittarius. And anciently, this was seen by various ancient cultures as the head of a creature, most obviously a snake. And the fact that the dark rift goes through it heightened that idea of this being the mouth, the open mouth of a creature. And the stars of Scorpius, which are right by the side of it, I'll come back to that, they almost seem to be like the tongue of this snake. And even though we associate Scorpius today with a scorpion, obviously, because it's the zodiac sign of Scorpio, many different ancient cultures believed that the stars of Scorpius was a snake. And I mean, this was believed in Hebrew myth, for instance. It's there in Native American myth. It's there in Maya myth. You know, and it's there in various other parts of the world that Scorpio actually represented some kind of snake. And I like to see it as almost like the forked tongue or the active spirit of this snake, which quite clearly is the Milky Way itself. Again, an ancient idea that the Milky Way around us is like a snake that wraps itself around the world, what's known as the world encircling snake, and it's forever chasing its own tail. And of course, in ancient Egyptian tradition, this was known as the Ouroboros snake. Okay, that's what it is. There's an indigenous religion of people known as the Yazidi in the Near East. They were in Anatolia, they were in the area of Göbekli Tepe, and they have a belief, or certainly did in the past, I don't think they've still got it, in a world encircling snake that forever turned about the sky. And it was said that if ever the head catches the tail, the end of the world would come, which clearly shows we're talking about cyclic time, basically. And as I say, this is the elliptical enclosure. I showed it area. There are these incredible buttresses and thrones at the end. And if you sat on those, looking out east, on the night of midwinter, you would see exactly the head of that Milky Way serpent rising right in front of you. And I think that that's one of the reasons why this whole structure was created, particularly where it is. So there's the galactic bulge there, and those are the stars of Scorpius. That's the head part there. So as I say, it's almost like they're coming out of the head. And so, what's going on here? Well, once again, this comes down to the people trying to connect with some kind of cosmic source, a source of creation, and either by chance or design, I think that the people of Karahan Tepe specifically managed to work out that there was some kind of intelligence connected with the central area of the Milky Way. They saw it as the head, the thinking consciousness of this Milky Way snake, and focused their attentions on that. And I believe that the types of rituals that were going on there involved shamanic journeying, where people would quite literally get possessed by this cosmic snake. They'd probably fall over on the ground, giving pronouncements to attendants, and that this in some way aided and helped the development of the Tash Tepeler culture. I also think that it's behind the memory locally of the Garden of Eden and the Serpent of Eden being associated with this particular area. In other words, the Serpent of Eden is a memory of connecting with this cosmic serpent, seen in terms of the Milky Way with its head as the galactic bulge. And this was done by my good friend, the artist Russell Hussain, for my book Karahan Tepe, which came out late last year, with these ladies here obviously involved with some kind of serpent ritual. And as I say, we now know that they definitely were using snakes within it. There are snakes everywhere, by the way, as far as carvings at Karahan Tepe. They're crawling up the sides of stones, they're incised on benches. There's grooves in the ground that quite clearly snakes and whatever, plus you've got that huge great head. So, I think this is what was going on here. And if you want a comparison, think of Delphi in Greece, where you have what's known as the oracle. Now, this is where a priestess would sit over supposedly a fissure in the rock beneath the Temple of Apollo, and fumes coming up from a dead serpent that had been supposedly killed by Apollo would intoxicate this priestess, who was known as the Pythia, or the Oracle, and she would get possessed by Apollo, who would make the pronouncements through her. But the interesting thing is that the form of Apollo that possessed the Oracle wasn't some shining sky being, it was a snake. The form that Apollo would appear was as a snake. And I find this really, really interesting, because it's quite clear that whatever was going on at Delphi was a much more formalised version of a much more shamanic culture or community that probably pre-existed at that site. Okay, so that's the book. I haven't got any today, I'm afraid, but you can obviously get it online. But so what was this Tashkapala culture? Where did they come from? Well, obviously, one of the subtitles of the book is The Civilization of the Anunnaki. You've probably heard this term a lot. Zachariah Sitchin wrote that they were space beings that came down here 400,000 or 500,000 years ago, created humanity to work down mines to get gold that was then taken off planet to Nibiru. Don't think that that's correct, basically. The Anunnaki are a memory of the gods of the Sumerians. Their original name was Anuna, and the Anuna. And it was only later that the word Ki, which means earth, was added to it. And the term Anuna, basically, if it's broken down, means, well, some say it's those of princely seed, but I think that's completely wrong, I'm afraid. Gods of the sky, divine ones of the sky, or quite simply, the sky people. Now again, that might be seen as strengthening the idea that they came down from the stars. I don't think so. I think what it means is it was those who could reach the sky, those that had knowledge of astronomy, of cosmology, of the movements, the cyclic movements of the celestial bodies, and brought that knowledge into southeastern Anatolia as a shamanic elite that kick-started the Tashkapala culture. And Professor Klaus Schmidt, who you can see me with there, who was the discoverer of Göbekli Tepe in 1994, he actually wrote in his book that came out in 2012 called Göbekli Tepe that the Anuna were represented by the T-shaped pillars, particularly those in the centre, and that they were the ancestors of those that created these enclosures. And he even said that Göbekli Tepe was the place where they were supposed to live, the Anunnaki, or the Anuna, which was the Duku Mound. The Duku Mound was placed on top of a mountain called Karsag. And he said that this is where it was, and I think that he got it absolutely spot on. Although I wouldn't necessarily just classify just one site as representative of Karsag or Duku. I think it relates to the whole culture as a whole in this area. But I think he was right. So coming back to this guy here. Now he's clearly not a T-shaped pillar that's very abstract and clearly anthropomorphic. This guy's got all of his features, basically, obviously. So, is it possible that this is a representation of the ancestors of those that created the Tashkapala culture? Is this one of their ancestors? Are we looking here at the face of an Anuna, one of the sky people? And I think the answer is yes. But who were these people? Where did they come from? Well, in my books, what I've said for a long time is that the place of origin was far to the east of Anatolia in what is today the area beyond the Ural Mountains that divide Europe and Asia in Siberia and Mongolia. And archaeologists are now catching on to this. This was a headline from 2022, Migration from Siberia behind Formation of Göbekli Tepe, experts say. And this was at a big conference. They've since followed this up with papers. And this is what I think was going on. There was a big spread, migration out from the area of Siberia, probably around 30 to 40,000 years ago, that came out like waves of activity and would eventually go into Europe. It would go into Anatolia, modern day Turkey. It also obviously went south into the Indian subcontinent, and obviously to everywhere else as far eastwards as the Russian Far East. And we can tell this from the different technologies, the way they seem to spread out from the area of Siberia. So what was going on there to trigger all of this in the first place? Well, the answer is distant cousins of ours called Denisovans. Denisovans, you probably all know about Neanderthals. Neanderthals were those that were around before us in Europe and in Asia, all the way up to the area of Siberia. Now, they were little guys, okay? But the Denisovans, all the evidence that we have so far, and this is coming from the paleogeneticists doing this work, is that they were big guys. They were the size of the largest WWE wrestlers or American footballers, and possibly were of great height as well, maybe 7 feet or more in height. And they were incredibly intelligent, incredibly sophisticated. I mean, just look at this Denisovan bracelet here. I mean, not only is it a beautiful item, but there is a hole, a drilled hole in it, where the drill rate is so fast that it's comparable to a modern day drill. And this is a minimum of 45,000 years old. I mean, some sources suggest it maybe is 60,000 years old. The Denisovans also created the first bone needles with holes in to create tailored clothing. They may well have ridden horses because of DNA evidence found within this cave. They almost certainly create the first musical instruments in the form of a flute or a pipe with holes in it that was found in the Denisova cave in Siberia. And on top of that, I think this comes next, one item that almost certainly Denisovan that's come out of the Denisova cave is this cave lion figurine made of woolly mammoth ivory, minimum 40 to 45,000 years ago, probably created by the Denisovans. But what's so interesting about it is that the fur, which is presumably what these lines supposed to represent, have very specific numerics to do with them. I mean, the top one has got 32, 4 times 8, 32. The bottom one is 5 times 10 or 5 times 8 is 40. 8 relates to cycles of Venus. Every 8 year, Venus completes a cycle. But it also completes further cycles at 32 and 40 years. And of course, all these numbers together make 72 years. 72 years is the length of a mini age in the traditions of the shamans of Siberia. It was also seen as the human lifespan, 72 years. It also has other astronomical implications. And it also relates once again to Venus. And I think that what they're doing here is monitoring the celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and Venus. And they're becoming obsessed with numbers by this time. And this only then develops more and more and more as the millennia, the tens of millennia, go through, until eventually all of this type of sophistication starts to appear in places like Göbekli Tepe and obviously Stonehenge. So this is basically what I think happened originally. Is here's the Ural Mountains. You can either go above them or below them. If you're in Siberia, you're generally going to go beneath them if you want to go down here. And I think this is what eventually happened, is they end up in the area of Anatolia and Göbekli Tepe and kickstart the Tash Tepe'la. But others move across the top of the Urals down into northern Europe, places like Finland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, where they're bringing with them their language, which we know today as Uralic or Finno-Ugric, okay? And they're coming right the way through Northern Europe, through Scandinavia, and then across a continent or a landmass that no longer is with us called Doggerland, that linked the area of Denmark and thus Scandinavia with Britain right up to the shores, and was there down to about 6,500 BC when it finally sank, or the last vestiges of it disappeared, and that these people end up in the Orkney Islands, and that this isn't a particularly good map, but from the Orkney Islands, which is where the altar stone comes from, remember, at Stonehenge, they then start moving into various other parts of the British Isles, and obviously including Ireland, including the Boyne Valley, where you have Newgrange and monuments there, Nath and Dowth, Isle of Anglesey, Bryn Cathley Dhu and whole Neolithic cultures, over into Yorkshire, Rudston and Bridlington, where there was a massive Neolithic culture. Remember, this is the people that we know as the Grooveware people, and Ilkley Moor in there, right the way down to Avebury and Stonehenge, and for some reason Clacton. It never quite worked out why they gave to Clacton, but we'll get there eventually. And yeah, and this is what happened, and I think that originally they brought with them that language, that the Uralic language, but eventually they were overtaken by the incoming Bronze Age peoples that were coming in, again, probably as far east as the Russian, Eurasian steppe. And by this time, these guys have got horses, they've got carts, they've got, chariots and stuff like this, so that they're able to move along that steppe very fast. So as I say, this is what I think was going on, getting into Anatolia here. These people enter there probably about 12,000, 10,000 BC. And so this is the guy again, but years ago, using all the information that we had to do with what we call the Swiderians, or this Epi-Paleolithic culture, I got Russell Hussain to do this impression of what they might look like. I mean, notice the really big jaws, large head, all the rest of it. And this is the guy that was discovered in 2023. And I think that there is a resemblance there. Let's just say that. I don't think it is a coincidence. Therefore, if that's what an Anunnaki looked like, I think that this also does represent what an Anunnaki looks like. So, anyway, that's probably almost about it. Oh, last story, just to finish, just to blow your heads, okay? All right? You like this? When myself, Hugh and JJ were in the area of Corahan a couple of years ago, we got to hear about a discovery that was made at another hill to the south. We heard that there was a very strange statue that had been discovered. So we tracked down the farm, and this was it. This weird, almost like bird head skull, and this weird, almost like Viking-like headdress going back here, maybe dreads again kept back. And this is the same as the head that's in Llanllwrth Museum. It's also got a very similar, hairstyle basically. It's got this snake on the side of it. You can see here, and it's a huge thing. And it was found by the landowner in the front of a cave. Now there's caves on this hill, and he owns this place. Or he's certainly the caretaker. I don't know whether he fully owns it. I don't know, but and these caves got like snakes on the top of them and all the rest of it. You can see them here. And I went up there first time, and he took me into a couple of these caves. But myself, Richard, who's sitting in the audience, Debbie Cartwright, and a couple of other friends, we went there last year, and unfortunately, the statue was now missing. And apparently, the story is that after one of the videos that we took of it was put up online, the authorities came knocking at his door, arrested him, put him in handcuffs, carted him off to the local station, right, interrogated him, because they thought he'd nicked it from somewhere, but eventually he was obviously let go because he said, well, I found him on my own land, in front of of these caves, which he goes up to regularly and messes about and whatever. So that wasn't there. But he took us into the caves, right? And they are very strange caves. Now, even though the archaeologists tell us they're probably only a couple of thousand years old, we think that parts of them are infinitely older, and that they may well have been the places where the shamans lived that operated out of nearby Corahan Tepe. And you've got these really weird pillars like this, with like these sort of central areas that with like two, like almost like a U shape. And Debbie, who's there, she said these were perches. In other words, people would stand on them like birds because they were bird shamans, vulture shamans. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting idea. But then our Turkish friend, not him, that's my friend Nick Burton, he came up and he said virtually the same thing. He said that these people would perch. And he actually showed these two marks on a ridge and stood in it and perched to show. And he couldn't speak a word of English, so he didn't know what we were talking about. So the idea of these people perching like birds in some, bygone age seems to have been real. Okay? Right, and that's us just there, Richard there. And whilst we were here, this guy was petrified of the jinn, what are known as the Arabic spirits that occupy these caves. Okay? Now, he 100% believed that they were haunted by the jinn. And in one particular cave that we went in, he basically said to us at first, he wouldn't even allow us into the cave until we proved to him that we had a belief in a higher power, whether it be God, Allah, or anything else. Just prove to me that you have that. He said, because if you haven't got it, even if you leave one hair behind, the jinn can get you afterwards. That's what he believed. Okay. And, we obviously respect local beliefs and ideas and traditions. So obviously we talked to him and eventually we convinced him. And he let us into this cave, right? I think that's us waiting to go in. Now, at first he wouldn't let us into the main part of it. There he is, perching himself, looking at a jinn that he can see in that cave. Okay? And he did a ritual whereby he picked up dirt, he kissed it, he chanted in Arabic, and I think eventually he was also taunting it by just throwing tiny pebbles occasionally. And when he was satisfied that this jinn would not interfere with us, he allowed us to come in. But even then, he said, stay to the back. And by the way, we're communicating through a phone app, a translator app all the time, when it works, obviously. So, there we are. Now, he's looking at this very moment towards that jinn, okay? And there's Richard at the left, trying to see if he can actually see something. And he did actually see like this sort of smoky mist thing going on there. And I'll come on to what Debbie saw in a minute. And so, go back. Eventually, obviously, we came out of there, and he was actually almost in tears because we were the first people that he had gone into this particular cave, and probably a couple of the others. He'd always gone on there on his own in the past, and so we were the first people that he trusted enough to actually go in these caves in the knowledge that the jinn wouldn't affect us. Okay, and when we came out, he actually made us use water from this basin to rub down so any possible influence of the jinn would be removed. Okay, so we then went back to his house. We enjoyed his hospitality, and then eventually, by the way, you could see the hill right by the side of his farm. Eventually, it got near sunset, and the weather just suddenly changed. There was like a blusters coming in off of this hill, and things just changed. Just felt like this was the time we had to leave. Now, get out. And so I've walked down, that's him, because obviously he's going to tend his gate and say goodbye. Our other friends are in the car here, coming down here. Okay? And so just outside of his property, we're just about to drive off in this car, and somebody notices a figure standing on the hill. Now bear in mind, we've been up on this hill for about the last 2 or 3 hours, and there've been nobody up there whatsoever, other than one lad, clearly a local neighbour lad, saw some activity up there, probably a shepherd boy, just came up and said hi. He was just in normal Western clothes, that was it. There was only one person that came up whilst we were up on this hill. And our friend Renee took photographs because it was something weird was clearly going on with this figure. And this was the figure that's on that hill, okay? But this is what happens when you glue it up. We didn't do this until we got back to the hotel that evening.
Brilliant.
Now, what the hell is that? Now, skeptics have said, oh, it's probably just a Muslim woman in a full hijab and all the rest of it, and she just happens to be up there and you didn't notice it. The problem with this is that we were there during Ramadan. Now, in Ramadan, as you know, Muslim people are not allowed to eat from dawn till dusk. This was just at the point of dusk, just after it. There is no way a Muslim woman is going to be wandering on her own up on a hill when, and this is their culture, she will be preparing the meal for the house for the first time that they can eat in that day. There's absolutely no way. And anyway, that doesn't look like a woman in a full hijab. And anyway, we contacted the owner, sent him the picture, and said, do you know who this is? He said, no. We wrote back and said, do you think it could be a jinn? He said, yes. But what's so weird is that the picture I took, without even realising this, the figure is there. So it's not some anomaly. There he is, or she, or whatever, we'll come on to that. And there it is. Those are 2 pictures I took, not Renee. Renee took 2. And that mine, obviously my camera phone is crap, so that's the stuff you get from mine, I'm afraid. But, I say, there it is again. Now, so what is it? I mean, is it a jinn? Well, here's a clue. When we were in the cave, and this guy was pointing towards this jinn, where even though Richard saw this like smoky column there, which is one of the signs of a jinn, Debbie saw what she described as a very large, almost like a luminous scorpion at the same spot that he was pointing. Now at first I didn't really make the link, but what's so interesting, right, here he is again, what's so interesting is that the local gods and goddesses of this region are known as the Hurrian. The type of ancient culture was Hurrian, okay? And their main goddess was known as Ishara. Okay, there's an image of that's about the only image that exists of her. That's in a place called Hattusha in central Anatolia. And she is personified as a scorpion, originally as a snake. Her star is the red star Antares in the constellation of Scorpius. She presides over the demons and evil spirits, the jinn in Arabic, whose body is within the caves and mountains of southeastern Anatolia. Her priestesses were oracles and prophetesses. So, she is the queen of the jinn. And what's so interesting is that I'd not even thought that this could be a female, to be honest. For some reason, I assumed it was male, I don't know why. But somebody we actually showed the picture of intuitively said that shows a woman. And that triggered something off. I thought, oh my God, I wonder if we actually saw the queen of the jinn. And the belief of this guy, the power of the belief of him in the presence of the jinn somehow helped with our presence conjure this into existence. And one last thing, when I showed this at the Origins conference in November, which by the way this year is October 25th, if you want to come along, it's in Pewsey in Wiltshire. Somebody came up afterwards and said, did you realise that as far as jinns are concerned, in Islamic folklore, a jinn can only manifest during Ramadan because it's the time when the humans are most at their weakest and they won't be attacked by humans. So there's a tradition that jinn can only physically manifest during the time of Ramadan. Anyway, I think I've talked enough. So I didn't bring any books today because I just didn't really have any. But that's the latest book that came out late last year. Karahan Tepe, Civilization of the Anunnaki and the Cosmic Origins of the Serpent of Eden. Graham Hancock, nice little testimonial there for it. We go abroad, obviously, on these tours. So we've got 2 tours to Turkey this year. One is in May, 12th to 24th. That goes basically to all of the sites we're talking about, but including the central area, Cappadocia and Fairy Chimneys. Then we've got another one in September, which also goes to Göbekli Tepe and Karahan and Istanbul, but also goes far out to the east to Lake Van and Mount Ararat and whatever. And if you are adventurous, then we are going to Peru and Bolivia and Easter Island in November. So I'm going to be away almost a month, I'm afraid, at that time. So anyway, that's probably about it. Oh, and this is the way that Hugh Newman sees me. Andy Collins, the geezer. There, and that's about it really. And also I've done articles on Stonehenge, on the altar stones, on the Masonic Temple and dodecahedron, shape of the universe. The links are on the opening page of andrewcollins.com, my website there. So if you want to contact me, obviously contact me through social media. All the links are with andrewcollins.com, and there's an email as well if you want to use that. So thank you very much for your time.